I always wanted to be a teacher when I started school.
We're here for the students and we want what's best for the student.
And I love watching people learn.
Your teacher, student, academics, curriculum, whatever, that center post, the one that keeps this education together.
Hello, and welcome to the Last Best Learning podcast, a podcast designed for Montana's educators, where our mission is to deliver digestible and relevant professional learning that honors educators' capacity in an increasingly busy world. Our state's educators empower minds, elevate futures, and inspire self-discovery, and we walk beside them. We're your hosts, Claire Mikeson, Katrina Engeldrum, and Michelle McCarthy, OPI's ELA, Math, and Science coordinators. Last month, we heard from two technology directors, Kathleen Kuchera and Kiki Moses, who reflected on the importance of student data privacy in an era of increasing technological reliance, both in and out of the classroom. They also touched a bit on AI in the classroom, which is the topic of this week's episode. As educators, you probably already have some experience with, or at least an opinion on, artificial intelligence. Whether you love it, hate it, or just have a lot of questions, we can all agree on its significant impact on education. We're so excited to welcome two educators from Montana whose work often centers on AI. Connor Mulvaney, a teacher and AI educational leader from Polson Public Schools, and Jason Neiffer, Executive Director of the Montana Digital Academy, and the 2024 recipient of the Montana Educational Technologists Association's Meta Empowered Superintendent of the Year Award. Today, they'll be sharing their experiences, expertise, and perspectives on the benefits, challenges, and considerations of using AI in the classroom and tools and resources for educators. We're so excited to learn more about this topic, so let's get started. Thank you so much for being here today, Jason and Connor. Can you introduce yourselves and your work and explain how your interest in AI integration in the classroom came about?
Yeah, my name's Connor Mulvaney. I teach high school computer science at Polson High School. I also work this year as our district AI specialist, and in that role, I kind of do a bunch of different things related to AI, but it all falls under the umbrella of trying to help teachers understand what is AI and trying to, from that understanding, work to modify our curriculum as it needs or figure out ways that we can teach and talk to students about AI. So kind of big umbrella there, but been spending a lot of time working on the AI within our district. And my interest in AI came about, 2 years ago or so when I hopped on ChatGPT for the first time and was like, whoa, this thing's kind of interesting, and just started playing around a lot, and then started having some conversations with colleagues like, hey, have you tried this? And most of them are like, no, I haven't. And then that kind of snowballed eventually to having a more formal discussion within our district where I led a training last January, so January of 24, where we had a big district-wide training talking about AI. So yeah, I guess it was kind of just started to play around with it and be like, oh wow, this is interesting, and students are going to use this to play around with it as well, and so got to be prepared.
My name is Jason Neiffer. I'm the Executive Director of Montana Digital Academy, a job I've had for 3 years this past January, and I've been in and around Montana public education for the last 28 years. I was previously a classroom teacher where I taught social studies and debate and computer science and newspaper and speech and those types of electives, and I started playing with ChatGPT when it was released in November 2022. The announcement of its release was kicked around my circles, which is mostly nerds. And as it turns out, they were very excited about this technology. I subsequently have remembered through some email traffic that I actually tried out a very early version of ChatGPT a couple years ago, or actually a couple years before the release of ChatGPT 3.5. And it was interesting then, as I recall, but nothing obviously that stuck with me. But it took about 1 hour of playing with then relatively low function, relatively slow, prone to going out because of the popularity of the tool. It took me about an hour to figure out that this is something that is likely to bring profound changes to the way we interact with information, not just in education, but really everywhere in our society, in the way we work, in the way we interact with each other. Since that time, I feel like part of my job is to keep an eye on evolving technologies. Distance learning requires a really solid tool set to be able to engage students and be thoughtful about curriculum development and the other pieces of a great online course. And so, in my time at Digital Academy, we have certainly kept an eye on evolving technologies. And I can say, without a doubt, that ChatGPT and its cousins are going to bring a profound change to that particular model. Since that time, I've spent a lot of time digging through these tools, playing with them. You're going to probably hear the word play a lot with me today because I think playing with these tools is a really important component to starting to wrap your brain around them because they're unlike anything that we've had in computing to this point in humanity. But since playing with them, I am now convinced that while there is certainly some significant hazards that we need to be mindful about as we proceed forward, there is such an extraordinary opportunity for us to give teachers and students alike a really incredible tool set to learn, to interact, to create, to complete work and tasks that I think it's wise for educators and education to keep a close eye on these trends.
Thanks. You mentioned ChatGPT and its cousins, which stood out to me. But what exactly is artificial intelligence? And what are some of those different types that you mentioned that you see being used in education?
Well, artificial intelligence, according to the computer science folks I know, and I will watch Connor's face to make sure that I'm headed in the right direction here. But artificial intelligence is a very broad category of technologies, and in fact, has been around since the 1950s. So that's nothing new. And even chatbots is not a new phenomenon either. The first chatbot was called Eliza. It was a program released in the late 1960s that tried to mimic a counseling or a psychotherapy session. Obviously, it wasn't very functional, and it relied an awful lot on the question, how do you feel about that, as opposed to any deeper analysis. But the current generation of tools that I think has sparked so much imagination is generative artificial intelligence. And I think that, I see a lot of folks correcting one another when people speak of a generative artificial intelligence tool and say, no, that's not AI, that's generative artificial intelligence and a different thing. And the difference between that and machine learning and the broader data sciences, I think that that's an important discussion to have, and we should use the right terminology. But I also want to make sure that generative artificial intelligence is an inclusive community, that you shouldn't feel like you need a PhD in computer science to be able to use the tools, because the power of them is that you don't need a PhD in computer science to use these tools. I've seen some really, really interesting implementations of these tools. Certainly, the ability to personalize any content for any particular purpose is really amazing with artificial intelligence tools. And if we're speaking specifically about education, I keep thinking back to the mantra that has dominated the conversation around pedagogy over the last 25 years or so around differentiation. I have to say, I have a bit of a fraught relationship with the term differentiation, because I feel like that in the early days of that conversation, it was all about, the question I would ask is differentiating around what, right? Like, so how are you differentiating? Not just are you differentiating? And of course, the answer to that for a lot of folks was something that I didn't like, which was learning style, something that I feel like has been sufficiently debunked through research and scholars. But the other thing I've also felt over time is that differentiation is really hard, and it's also very time consuming. And when you talk about, especially the 2025 classroom, where you may have students in such vast differences of abilities in a classroom, that I think a lot of compromises have to be put into place to be able to appropriately differentiate, especially to your students that need more or have more demands inside the classroom. And the teachers that are using it to relevel text or perhaps to adapt an interesting lesson idea to a student's accommodations in an IOP or 504, the ability to think creatively, to freshen up a lesson, or to look at what content, modern day content, out in the world content, current events content might freshen up a lesson and help you re-envision how you teach something, I think is pretty extraordinary. And I have all the concerns that everyone else does about lower critical thinking and diminishing the learning environment, and all those pieces are super duper important, and I certainly don't want to minimize those. But one of the reasons why I kind of advertise myself as an AI centrist is that I think we need to be clear-eyed in both directions, that we need to be super mindful of the really, really interesting implications of these tools, but also if we can pull off models that give teachers what I think are superpowers, then I think we should go for it.
Connor, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that the ability of these tools to, I will use the word differentiate. I think differentiate to student abilities or student strengths and weaknesses. These tools are really good at that. And so I teach coding, I teach computer science, and I often give students a project. And that project, I now often give 2 or 3 levels of that project. Here's a lot of support, here's not much support, and here's a challenge. And so those 3 levels are easy for me to generate with various ChatGPT or whatever, ChatGPT et al, as we could say, all of the different tools that do that. And so teachers that have the ability to have the knowledge and training on how to use tools to do that, then in theory have some more bandwidth within their day because they have to spend less time prep working that. And the space that I focus on a lot is this teacher training aspect, which is, okay, so if we want teachers to have that training, if teachers want to learn how to use these tools to do that, how should we do that? How do we provide those trainings to teachers? And I've been really lucky this year to be given some time within my day, within my district, to focus on that. And I think as a result, the teachers within Polson School District that are interested in learning about AI have shown up to the different trainings that I've offered and are now becoming more AI educated teachers and using it to help them with their prep work as needed. But that's a huge piece of it, is that we have this new technology that people need to be trained on how to use. Because in some ways, it's this exploratory chatbot. You can go open ChatGPT and ask it whatever question you want, but that platform also provides very, very little structure on how a teacher might use those tools. And there's various ed tech companies out there that are creating tools with a little bit more structure for teachers as well. But I still think some form of professional learning opportunity for teachers, some form of continued professional learning opportunity for teachers is really, really in need. And it's more than just having a one-off training within a district. It's more than just having this or that, because as I've experienced, I led a training last January for my district, and I pulled up my slides for that a while ago, and I was like, a third of these are a little out of date. I need to change them. This technology is moving very quickly. But the general idea that we now have a chatbot interface that can solve a lot of problems for both teachers and students is still present. They're just getting a lot better.
I'm going to double down on that. Connor's absolutely correct. And in fact, if anything, I think anyone that's having a discussion about AI in education really needs to start with a professional learning component of this. But I wouldn't even go a step further, that I feel like we made a lot of mistakes broadly in education in the internet era. We didn't acknowledge the power of the tools. A lot of folks relied on what I thought was a fairly ineffective concept, was let the students teach us. the concepts in the early 2000s about the so-called digital natives and digital immigrants, and that adults couldn't possibly understand the brain changes going on in students, yada, yada, yada. I've always felt that to be a somewhat bankrupt concept, but it also led us to, I think, where we're at right now. The effort to ban cell phones from schools, I think, is a very complex issue, but one of the reasons why it's necessary to have those discussions now is because I don't think we helped students learn about this shockingly powerful tool that was now sitting in their pockets. And I'm not saying that we should bring cell phones in the classroom, or we should have brought cell phones in the classroom and used them as learning tools. It's not a terrible idea, but we should have at least empowered teachers much, much more to be stewards of those skills. And I now feel like we're starting to go down the same roads with artificial intelligence. We're not investing in professional learning as much as we should. We're not helping students understand that. And if a student's primary channel for learning about artificial intelligence is TikTok or Snapchat, they will not learn how to be great learners with this tech. They will learn how to take shortcuts with this tech. And I think you're already seeing that the panic that's going on around academic honesty, I get it, because it's extremely challenging. And, there are now tools available in the last couple weeks that will log into a system for you and take a quiz for you and complete assignments for you. That's available right now, not in the near future. That technology exists right now, and we need to be the educators in the room every single time. And Connor's point about PD is absolutely spot on.
I'm sure you saw my eyes get big when you said about the the system that can sign into your learning platform for you. But circling back on the PD thing, I love that in Connor's case, this is showing up organically in the school itself, and it's teacher leader driven, and it's almost like you said, hey, this is what I'm interested in. Who wants to join me for this learning journey? And I think that's a really good model. I think sometimes we can enter a space and the person delivering the PD is like the self-proclaimed expert on whatever topic of discussion. And on a topic like this, really, it's so evolving so quickly. No one remains the expert. I feel like there's just really different levels of comfort. It's like, hey, I'm comfortable with this, and I'm willing to do the exploration and decode and keep up on it and transfer my level of comfort to you and bring you along on this process that we're all on. But I think it's a really beautiful model, and I'm glad you're doing it. I would love to see, kind of after you've been doing it for a year or so, what do your teachers in the school say about it, and what impact has it had for them? Because I think it's a model that other schools could emulate themselves.
Yeah, thanks, Katrina. I see Montana schools as having, like, a lot of school districts are small, especially if we look at more populated states or more densely populated states. And if you have a small school district, then you have some abilities to find creative solutions and empower teachers because not every school district has a technology representative in the DO. And if they do, then that person in the DO already has a full-time job prior to the release of all these generative AI tools. And so I think what it boils down to is empowering a teacher. And maybe some districts have a teacher who wants to focus on some of this stuff, but maybe it is a committee. And I think I'm seeing a lot of schools start to develop like their AI team, which comprises teachers from various departments. And I see that as being like the schools that are doing that are going to continue to progress positively more quickly and be less blindsided by the AI technology releases. And so I think it's all about giving the teachers the time. I think creative solutions can happen. Like, hey, let's get all these one representative from each department in a school and have them have a common prep time that they focus on some of this work, because I think I think to your point of like being the expert, I'm not the expert like I've led some trainings, but I stole this term from someone, but I really like being the lead learner. Like we'll talk through this and have some discussion questions, but I've just maybe spent a little bit more time on a chatbot than some other people, but I also fully recognize that there's teachers within other content areas and teachers that have been in the schools much longer than I have. So everyone needs to be at the table for those discussions. And yeah, it's kind of the Wild West a little bit because there's this new technology and some schools, some states have guidance, regulations, policy, and others don't. And so we're in this kind of big exploratory time. And I think that empowering teachers to be those explorers and be those learners is a really positive model.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And to take that a step further, then how we can support those teachers at a broader level is we need to make sure that our, I'm going to call you an expert, Connor, our experts have their own professional learning opportunities, right? That connect to other teachers in other schools. And, you know, I certainly, I've been in Montana all my life. I've been to all four corners of our state. I know about the vast differences from district to district on a variety of different issues, but I think of it in terms of geography, and that we have opportunities now because of the platforms available to us to connect. You know, I don't know if it's 20 or 100 or 200 teachers across the state that really are interested in pushing these tools in the right direction and finding those critical balances. So, you know, to help support the efforts that Connor's talking about, you know, we also need to think about, is there an infrastructure we can put in place to provide expertise to the emerging experts? And I think that collaborative nature is so important. And I love hearing someone in the field like Connor talking in that language, because I think that's the only way we're going to be able to do this right.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit and go back to what tools you've seen be successful in the classroom, and are there tools that are emerging that in both your areas of expertise you're noticing teachers leaning into that are very powerful in supporting their instruction and teaching?
That's queued up for you, Connor.
Yeah. Let's see. My personal view is that before we bring a tool to the classroom, students should be exposed to sufficient discussion about what AI is, what the technology is capable of, what the pros and cons, ethics around this technology are. And all of those questions fit under this newly defined umbrella of AI literacy. And so in terms of tools, I do very little AI tool integration into my classroom. Rather, I just do a ton of discussions about what this technology is, because I would like to see some clear data. I've tried to gather some data, but most students at a high school level, I would guess, are using AI for some or a good chunk of their schoolwork. So they know what these tools are capable of. They understand that these tools can do most of their schoolwork. So can we have a discussion about it? And there's an organization out there, AI EDU, and they develop a bunch of free AI literacy curriculum to download for teachers. So I would say that's been really successful for me within my classroom. And I've also helped to develop some weekly integration across all sorts of, across all classrooms at the high school, where teachers will use some of their curriculum to have short 10-minute discussions with students about AI. And they're open-ended discussions and allow students to kind of talk about this new technology. And then I have done a little bit of like custom chatbot building. So I've built a couple different AI chatbots that are specifically built to function within my lesson. And so, for example, students are getting ready to create a program that they're going to spend a week or two on. Maybe they go have a conversation with a chatbot to get some starter code for that, or some outline of steps, or something along those lines. Maybe it's some help with some error identification. And so I've experimented a little bit with some of those custom tools for my classroom and a couple other teachers as well. And I don't know, there's been some successes to that. I think they provide students some support, but I think as Jason alluded to earlier, like I I'm definitely concerned about over reliance and overuse. And what we have right now is a tool, any of these AI chatbots that can answer students' questions all the time. And I want students at times to spend some time thinking and challenging themselves and doing some critical thinking. And so I get a little bit concerned that some of those chatbots are going to provide a here's your solution every time you have a question. And so that's part of the reason why, to your question about different tools, like I'm a little bit hesitant to implement tools into my classroom for those reasons.
Yeah, that's really valid. I think that's been a long-term trend in education in general, right? Like our concern that kids are taking the easy way out, whatever that looks like. We've had, I mean, that same argument has been universal to the infancy of Google, where people are like, oh, they can just Google the answer. And we talked about, you mentioned the risks of losing that cognition and deep critical thinking. I'm wondering if there's other risks or pitfalls that either of you have noticed that teachers should be aware of when they're seeing students utilize these tools or when they're utilizing them themselves.
Certainly, the data privacy issue has to be front of mind for everyone. And I speak of this often, but I cut my teeth in education in the early internet era. And in fact, my first day of teaching, I won't tell you which year in the 90s that I started teaching, but a long time ago. And it's just so happens my first year of teaching was associated with the first time there was wired internet, Ethernet internet in the school I was teaching, which was Capitol High School in Helena. And as it turns out, I was considered somewhat of an advanced tech teacher by using my cool PowerPoint slides, right? But the thing that is different between 2025 and the late 90s and the early internet days is that, I would frequently send kids to the lab to create accounts for this or look at that tool and do this and do that. Or, hey, you need an email account? Let's go create an email account. Obviously, that has ended in a very dramatic fashion over the last 15 years. But the current focus on student data privacy certainly mandates that we're thoughtful about this. And unfortunately, we don't know enough about how data is used. I'm not talking about as in like the cloak that's oftentimes in front of these particular companies and how they use our data, as in like we don't really understand how AI works. And you can ask computer engineers that. There was a great interview in 2024 with, I think he was one of the folks, engineers from Anthropic that makes the Claude large learning model that likened it this way, that he thinks of AI as a big box of green lights. And if you open up the box, you give it input, some lights blink, and then there's output and you recognize it, but they don't know why these lights blink. They don't know how they put the information together to get the output. And, there are simple steps you can take to protect your data, which is that you never give access to the large language models to any personally identifiable information. But that's going to slow down adoption. And, Connor's point about being thoughtful about introducing AI without actually using AI is probably the way we need to start with all these AI discussions because of the data privacy issue. The other issue I think we need to be really thoughtful about is learning design and the impacts on how we learn and assess that learning. And it's truly unfortunate that computer-driven multiple choice tests become either a little bit or a lot less valid because you can get Chrome plugins that will answer questions for you now that cost little or no money, because AI, as it turns out, that's the kind of task that AI really excels at, which is writing multiple choice questions. Connor mentioned writing kind of his own bots. We've done the same thing at the Digital Academy. We have a tool we call Open Multiple Choice Question Writer that is trained off of open source studies and resources, and not only builds pretty great multiple choice questions on demand, but it also walks you through what a psychometrician might do, which is to look at every individual item and make sure that it's an effective either correct answer or distractor. And that's a good example of something where, and I'll just use myself as an example of this. I thought I was a decent classroom teacher back in the day, and I used to write jokes into my multiple choice questions. I certainly wasn't doing a detailed analysis on every question that I was doing. And in fact, I've stuck some of my old tests into our open multiple choice question bot and seen how terrible my questions were. But the point is that those are the kind of things that AI really excels at. But unfortunately, I think that especially poorly thought through assessment is just not going to cover it. But I've also heard what I consider to be very dangerous ideas that, well, now that AI can write, that we can minimize the teaching of writing. We don't need to anymore because AI will do that. And of course, we assign essays in a classroom, not because we need another 150 hot takes on the Great Gatsby. We are full of hot takes on the Great Gatsby, but it's a critical thinking exercise, right? Now, does that mean that we couldn't freshen up that model a bit or maybe look at other types of knowledge construction? Well, sure, that's a different conversation. But, suggesting that AI can take the place of learning. And in our early data sets are very mixed. Microsoft released a study yesterday that suggests the more you use generative AI, it decreases the cognitive effort and cognitive effects. According to the survey of knowledge workers was their strategy. And at the same time, there was a data set, I think 6 or 8 weeks ago, that some students in Africa were able to gain 2 years in a short amount of time in math and language instruction because of the highly personalized nature of the tutors. And so these are concerns I have, and certainly we should be thoughtful about them, but I don't have an answer yet about what that balance is. And I think discussions like this and the experiences of teachers like Connor are really important to guaranteeing that we do this the best way we can.
Yep, your conversation made me wish I was in the classroom with AI, because specifically being science, you want your students, I was middle school, to do research. And I personally stumble over a research paper. I mean, there's so much detail, and AI could grade level that for me for this. Anyway, and I imagine several teachers are salivating over maybe the multiple choice maker ideas. So along that line, Connor, so teachers will listen, or educators will listen to this, and they're hearing all the things from the news. So can you give us specifics on how you encouraged the use of AI in the classroom, but with the caveats of how they avoid plagiarism and for them to learn how to fact check and things? So both the educators, and then how the educators would domino that down to their students.
Yeah.
No pressure.
That's a big one. I think there's a lot of layers there. From the educator perspective, I think that teachers that want to learn about AI in my district have benefited from showing up to various trainings that I have led and learning how these large language models work, how these chatbots work, and understanding why they sometimes give incorrect answers. And that's a part of this. That's like a critical thinking aspect, is like, whoa, this AI told me that, it excels in some tasks, but it doesn't excel in other tasks. So it may tell me that this math problem, here's the answer, and that's not the answer. So that is a really great question to have, or a discussion to have with teachers about like the reliability of these tools. Because at the end of the day, the way that a large language model works is that it predicts the next word in a sentence over and over and over and over and over, and is really darn good at it until it's not. And on the student side, so if I maybe you can clarify, if I understand the question is like, how do we encourage responsible use and fact checking of these tools?
Yeah, well, you said you mentioned earlier that in your classroom you have open-ended questions and discussions with your students, but you have a pretty solid background comparatively to the field. So if you go to anybody who's listening to this with that degree, or the span of knowledge base and familiarity with AI, how would you encourage them to approach their students with it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I think initially, I think having like discussions about what students feel about AI, what do they think about it? What do they know about it? What do they want to know about it? Like those are kind of my feeler questions generally with some students, like, hey, I'm trying to gauge what you know, how you use these tools. I'm really open saying, hey, I'm not concerned with getting you in trouble. Right now, I want to know how many of you use AI for schoolwork. And then hands will go up and we start an open discussion. And so that's kind of like my data gathering phase. And I'd encourage teachers to spend, half of a class period once a month doing something like that with their students, because it builds this rapport of like, hey, we're going to explore this together. And yes, I have this AI based knowledge, but I don't think that's necessary for having an open conversation with students about how they use these tools. And for what I've gathered from those is that over 50% of students are using AI for various aspects of their schoolwork, which concerns me because my guess is that 90% of those students are just asking AI to solve their problem that they're stuck on in whatever schoolwork assignment that is. I think that there's a good example that I can share here that kind of gets to some of those, the way that we have those discussions with students. Last week, I think it was, I was talking to students about how AI is not very good at math. Let me rephrase that. Generative AI, like ChatGPT, is not very good at math because it has, quote, learned to speak English rather than like understanding numbers and how numbers work. That's probably broad and partially incorrect overgeneralization, but I think it'll work for now. So we had a news item from AI EDU, this bell ringer, that said, hey, Meta is working on creating an AI that can help solve calculus problems. What's the benefits and risks of this? And so we kind of talked about, well, AI can already solve math problems. And I was like, oh, really? Like, tell me. And so the students would tell me about how AI solves math problems. And I thought it was very interesting. So then I was like, well, how many of us are in calculus? And none of the students in my class were in calculus. And so I was like, well, calculus is a little bit different than algebra 1 that some of these students are in, right? And so then I said, well, do we think AI can solve calculus problems? And some of the students were very confident and said, yes, I do think so. And so I pulled up a differential equation, multivariable differential equation or something. I'll say I don't know calculus I took it in high school, and I don't know very well. So I pulled up this question that I have no clue how to solve or what it's even asking. And then I asked the students, like, hey, like, so can AI solve this? And so one of them decided to enter it into ChatGPT and said, look, AI solved it. And I was like, how do you know that that's correct? And then they said, well, it gives me the step-by-step. And this totally floored me because I don't know, someone can go give me the step-by-step on how to build a house. Can I go build it now? Like, no, because it gave me the step-by-step on how to solve this calculus problem gives me nothing because I don't know calculus. And the same thing goes for these students who, might take calculus by the end of their college career, but these were freshman, sophomore mostly, or end of their high school. So that's a really tricky part about this because students are using good critical thinking skills. They're like, look, it gives me the step-by-step. Those are good things in math that I have learned to help show that a problem is correct. And now the AI is giving them the step-by-step. And so they think that this works, right? But it's just so tricky, right? There's a lot of layers there. And I'm like, man, I want to spend 2 whole class periods diving into this idea because there's lessons in critical thinking. There's like other questions we could ask. And so then I asked the students, I was like, well, what should we do? How do we know if this step-by-step is correct? And then one of them says, well, we could bring a math teacher in here. I was like, finally, this is great. This is good. We need content area experts. And AI is going to be a content area expert until it's not. And students don't know where that line is. And I think many people don't know where that line is. It's going to confidently give us a right answer, but we don't know. If you don't have the content area expertise, then you don't know whether or not that answer is right. And so I guess to like circle back to the original question about how to use this with students responsibly, I think that if a student has, like, I I allow students at times to write code with AI that they already know how to write. And coding is a slightly different environment. It's pretty close, like a pretty good sandbox to work within. It's at times like very logical and straightforward. There's no like student voice as they write code in the same way when they write essays. But when coding, I'll say, okay, oh, you want to create this set of variables to start your program? Okay, that's fine. I know you know how to do that. You want to do a conditional statement? Okay, I know you know how to do that. But if the purpose of what we're doing in class is to learn, then I am skeptical that having a chatbot answer students' questions is a good way for them to learn. And I think that type of metacognition that students would engage in, hey, am I sufficiently good at this type of programming to be able to allow AI to do that? I find that students at junior, senior level are able to engage in those types of questions better than underclassmen in high school.
Yeah, I can see a span from like even middle school. I mean, because students getting really active in using it would probably start in middle school, I would guess.
Connor's discussion, I think, opens up a huge rabbit hole about learning, right? But I think that we are probably about to have a incredible discussion across education about teaching and learning, right? Because I think we spent much of the last, 2, 3 decades talking about, how important core knowledge is. I've always been a core knowledge fan because I feel like you need to have a base of knowledge to be able to critically think up, Bloom's taxonomy or whatever learning model that you want to take on. But, if you don't know anything, right, then it's going to be very difficult to judge AI's output. And one of the observations that I've noticed is that people seem to have less concern about AI if it's not within their skill set. So artists and creators are very concerned about the creation of their pieces. Writers are concerned about writing output with this. Ignoring the intellectual property pieces for a moment, I get all that part. But if we decide that core knowledge needs to be a part of this because students need to be able to evaluate AI outputs and how they use the tools, then I suspect that we're going to have some critical conversational moments where we look at the K-12 spectrum, and then include post-secondary into it to talk about what's most important. I've already heard, again, repeats of the early Google days that don't assess students on things that they can Google. But that's a way to deal with AI, and that's not true at all because it turns out AI is really good at the stuff you can't Google, right? At least it confidently spits out something that seems like it's right. So, what do we do with that information? I would also note that something that I have started insisting on, and I think it's something that we need to be really pushy about. It's not happening very often as it did perhaps 2 years ago, but I think it's something that could fire up again. I tell anyone that wants to use AI in any context that great, you should use it. It's a really interesting and powerful tool, and I can name 100 examples, both professionally and personally, where it's provided a value add for me. But if you're not going to take responsibility for your use of AI, then don't use AI. I've seen folks that have made a perhaps poor judgment about when and where to use AI in a professional or personal context, and then it blows up in their face. And to be clear, it's blown up in my face once or twice too, which is one of the reasons why I've kind of moved to this stance. And if you're not willing to take responsibility for the output, then don't use it, right? Because otherwise, I think that we're creating yet another excuse for people not to take personal responsibility for how they work and interact. And I think that's a critical piece of this. But I don't know the answer to this either. But I also think that there's probably a spectrum here, right? And it's hard to teach spectrums and nuances in education. We certainly don't write our standards around nuances, right? And that's true. That tends to be much more concrete, right? But I don't have any problem, and I can't imagine anyone would have any problem with writing a complaint letter with AI, right? That, you need it to be concrete. You may not always know the right phrases to get what you want. So, if you type in a couple of quick sentences and say, AI, write a complaint letter for me to a company, that seems like a pretty great use of AI that, if it's not handcrafted, your complaint letter, I don't think that matters. The outcome matters more there, right? But there is probably something to say about artificially generated fiction, artificially generated news stories. I don't know where that line is, and we're continuing to figure out how to draw that. But those nuances make this discussion, I keep using the term rabbit hole. I feel like AI itself is the best rabbit hole of all time. But I think those are the kinds of discussions that we need to be engaging in, especially with kids.
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking about all the ways, thinking about the future of our current students and what they'll need to, this is their wheelhouse, right? I mean, no matter what job they go into, these are the discussions they'll need to have, which I think that kind of compounds what Connor was saying earlier, that these discussions having with the students is so critical. This next question I have is kind of for both of you. How would you encourage, or what recommendations would you give if there's a teacher listening that has kind of a strong technology background to get started in using AI in their classroom? What would their beginning steps be? I love deadpan silence after I ask a question. Reminds me of the classroom.
Connor, that's so queued up for you.
Yeah, I guess I would kind of go back to what I said earlier, which is like, have we had discussions with our students about the ethics of these tools before we use them? So I think building some of those AI literacy skills before we start exploring is a necessary prerequisite. Yeah, I guess, are you asking specifically within the classroom, or like if they want to use it on their own?
In their classrooms. So I understand the discussion piece.
Yeah, I think you got to go back to the data privacy issue. Like we need DPAs with any company that we're going to work with, and so that makes it really restrictive for me to go out and explore with students. And I think that's fair. I think that we should be, so if we're gonna, if teachers want to explore with tools in their classroom, then they should find an education technology company that offers AI powered tools that will also sign a DPA with your district, a data privacy agreement. A workaround to that, because then all that student data that company is collecting, they're committing to not sharing that, right? And so a workaround to that is, let's say we'll find a way that no student data is collected, and a great way for me to do this is that I will just do all of the chatting with a chatbot. So I might put it up on our board. I've done this a couple times where we go and do something collaboratively together, and it's through my account, and so there's no student data privacy, student data collected. So a model that I've done for this, I'm a science teacher by training, and we looked at this news item about how AI can look at brain scans of people and try to predict what SSRIs, what medications might help them for conditions of like anxiety and depression. And so maybe there are nuances within those brain scans that doctors aren't picking up on, but a machine learning algorithm powered by AI could. And so what I did is I took that 30 page paper and summarized it into a 1-page paper for students to read. And then I uploaded the whole paper to AI and asked it to be like a doctor that is talking to high school students. And so they got to bring their questions to the table. We had like a read and annotate session for like 30 minutes, and then we went to the chatbot to ask those questions. And I think that if you're going to be integrating AI into the classroom, that there should be a really clear instructional use case. That instructional use case at times could be exploring, like, hey, we're going to explore and then reflect on our exploration. But for me, in that setting, my instructional use case is I want students to be asking questions about this science article, and I can either have students go and do that on their own, or we can all do it together. And AI is totally open world of possibilities when you open ChatGPT. And I think that lack of structure is really any high schooler is going to take advantage of that and say, oh, what questions can I ask it that aren't related to the schoolwork that we're doing? Because that's what high schoolers like to do. They like to mess around and explore. And so I think the best way to do that is like to do that if you're being intentional about those questions is, all right, let's do it all as a class. It's as if we're zooming in some expert to ask us some or answer some questions. And so, yeah, I think the data privacy problem or the data privacy component to it makes teachers need to be a little bit creative about some of the ways that they implement. And I think that's actually a good thing, because I get concerned that just giving these tools to students to play around with will result in more of those risks. I think we have to have a structured, hey, we're going to use this tool. This is why we're using it this way. Here are that I'm metacognitively narrating. Oh, that's an interesting question. I wonder if I can build on that in this way. Well, let's ask him this question. Who has an idea of how to ask that? So yeah, I guess that's kind of my thoughts on implementation.
I think that's a great information on where to start if they were interested.
I would encourage teachers to just start playing with it. I think that part of the problem with AI is that it really is like nothing we've had before, right? There's just no comparable tool set, feature, functionality that's anywhere close to AI. And that's part of the reason why you see a lot of people just using it for searches, even though I don't think it's particularly great at searching, or I think time on Google is better spent for searching than an AI tool. But something that I have noticed in folks, even very tech savvy folks that have used AI, is that they don't get that I mean, there are restrictions in AI. They don't want you doing dangerous things with AI or engaging in salty language or any of those pieces. But you can ask AI to do plainly ridiculous things, and it will do it for you. And once you start to kind of leave the boundaries of AI, or I'm sorry, of searching, and think of AI as something where you can do a lot of divergent thinking, then I think then you start to click into how can I be really creative about this in my classroom. Connor mentioned creating custom bots earlier, and I do that all the time. It's kind of a fun little project. I don't have any coding skills like Connor does, so I have to use no code things because I have no skills in that area. But something that I do wish. Actually, I have mixed feelings. I'd like to be in a classroom again because I love teaching, and I think AI would be a fun thing to try to navigate around. But also, I would spend most of my waking hours just creating images of historical figures. So I have to balance that in my head. But I've thought about lately. I used to, and I did a couple of them when I was a classroom teacher. I used to like to run simulations in my social studies classes because it was so much fun, and I have a little bit of a role-playing game background too, so it kind of mixes my interests. And I think about, in fact, I've created a couple of very basic tools about what it'd be like to run like a Paris Peace Conference 1919 simulation with, 4 or 5 groups of students in a classroom, and they come back with their information every day, and I feed it into AI, and it tells me what the next move is. Like it, kind of provides that interactive experience. Those tools are going to be professionalized at some point and available to all, but the teachers that get in and start building the stuff themselves, right, inside of ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of these tools, I think we'll have a real advantage because they're going to always have a completely unlimited tool set of which they can modify. And so that starts with playing, in my humble opinion. So I think playing with AI is by far the most important start to teachers kind of grasping the tool set.
Thank you.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. You have both talked about AI and its role in sort of supporting students or differentiation, or teachers taking some of that bandwidth or giving them more bandwidth back. Do you see any way that AI can specifically support rural teachers who might have challenges like limited resources or lack of access to professional development?
Yeah, I think that like for myself, so I started teaching coding. This is my 3rd year teaching coding, and I didn't know how to code before that. And so there's no other computer science teacher at the high school, and so I have learned a lot on my own through various conversations with ChatGPT or Claude, and used it as my coding coach, which has been really great. And so I think can that can be beneficial for teachers in a rural setting, especially if you're like the only social studies teacher, the only science teacher. You can use AI as a collaborative brainstorming tool. And that's like 80% of my use case is that, hey, I'm trying to do this lesson. I want to introduce these concepts. Give me 10 ways that I can creatively do that with a class of 20 students. When you don't have a department or you are the department, then having AI take on that role as colleagues to collaboratively brainstorm, I think is really positive. And you could also transition that beyond like content area, and you could say, hey, here are my instructional practices that I'm focusing on. This is what I'd like some help with. Maybe it's writing multiple choice questions like Jason was talking about, or maybe it's this or that. I think those opportunities certainly are there, which I would then reiterate. Teachers don't just do that on their own. They would benefit from professional learning opportunities, which showcase some of those those potentials through these tools. So yeah.
I'm gonna jump into and add that, as both our guests have said, both Jason and Connor, that you don't know when it's wrong. So if you're not aware of the information, you don't know if it's telling you incorrect information. So my advice would be, if you're interested in using this tool for that purpose, there's a capability with some of these generative AI tools and different account purchase levels and things like that, that you can actually drop in files, or you can tell it the resources that you would like it to use to inform that practice. And I highly recommend that if it's something that you know is a learning gap for you, to drop in, like if you're talking about latest research from NCTM on modeling tasks or something, and it's a PDF file that's 90 pages long, you can drop it into ChatGPT and ask it to use that to inform the responses it gives you, and it will give you more accurate responses because you've given it a resource that you trust. So I would highly encourage any listeners to engage in that practice if that's a way that they want to use this tool.
I think that's a really great point, Katrina.
And I have a specific tool recommendation here, which most people have access to. It's called Notebook LM from Google. It's available in private Google accounts, and you have to turn it on in a Google Workplace for Education account. But it's exactly that, I think it's actually the sleeper tool of AI right now, for a variety of reasons. But as an example of that, I've done this as a live demo before, but you can add in PDFs and Word documents and Google Docs and web pages and YouTube videos, up to 50 in the free account, up to 300 in a pro account. And then you can ask questions of it, and it focuses just on the sources, which eliminates a lot of the problems, as Katrina mentioned earlier. And it will also cite the source for you. So you can press a little button next to the comment, and it will take you right to the part of the source that's referring to. And I think of it in terms of, especially if we're talking about the rural school teacher that's teaching middle school, junior high, high school, that has 7 preps, right? And even if you're exceptionally well trained in content, having 7 preps worth of content in the back of your head is a little much, right? But you without even creating any intellectual property issues, you can find usually dozens of textbooks in every area that are open source and available for free, that you can download as a PDF, stick into Notebook LM or a tool like it, and you've created a knowledge oracle. And if it's the first time teaching biology, and it's been a while since you've taken a biology class, and you would like to learn more about cell biology, for example, or help me understand how I might break this down for students. That's such a power user piece that I think that, and there's a technical term for this, it's retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. But RAG models are amazing, and I think it does minimize a lot of the risk of using these tools.
Thank you, Jason. I'll have to look up that tool. I haven't heard of that one. Sounds
It's
exciting.
unbelievable. And don't record this part because I'm just going to ramble on for a second. But it's got this other wild piece where after you upload all your stuff, you press generate podcast, and it will create a podcast-like environment where two people. It's a little campy, so it sounds like a bad podcast actually. Like, oh, that's super fascinating. And now you can start the podcast, press join, and then it will insert you into the podcast so you can ask questions of the host, and it's so like 2100 sci-fi. But yeah, it's wild stuff.
Our work is done, ladies.
Yeah. I mean, I was like, what are you guys even doing here? You guys should just go become the production department now. So
Yeah, we should do an episode where that tool is our guest and play around with that. That's funny. Okay, so pivoting back again, I guess one of the questions we talked about, like there's these news pieces that come out that give us the most information that's up to date. We talked about how AI is constantly evolving and growing and changing. There's new tools every day, it feels like. What advice do you have for any educators who would like to stay informed and proactive? Where should they go to get accurate information about what's happening in this landscape?
I think part of it like depends on like what's your preferred medium of consuming stuff. Like this is a podcast. I like podcasts. There's a podcast called AI for Humans, which does a pretty good job at like some recent technical advancements as well as these like exploring creative tools. I think my first spot for everyone to start is Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick. It's a really, really great book. I facilitated a book club at my school within my district and had like 25 teachers be a part of it. And I think that was probably the number one PD related thing I've ever done within the district because it's a really, really great book and it's a pretty quick read. I mean, on social media, there's a variety of, can I send you guys like links to stuff after this?
Please do.
Okay. I'll send you a couple links. There's a Stay Informed document from AI for Education, which kind of outlines a couple of different people to follow that are doing various work in these spaces. But again, I think it kind of comes back to like, do you want to read someone's blog posts? Do you want to read a book? Do you want to listen to a podcast? I would say probably the number one thing for teachers to stay informed is like have conversations with other teachers within your building and within other districts, because like I can do all of this reading on my own or all of this listening to podcasts on my own, but having someone else to like, that could be Jason. I'm chatting with Jason for a little bit about these things, and we kind of process through some of this together. And I think that creating your professional or being a part of some form of AI professional learning community is really positive. And unfortunately, a lot of us throughout Montana are isolated geographically, but opportunities like this to listen into a podcast or to reach out to, teachers who are doing work in this space. I would say that anyone who wants to shoot me an email and ask me questions, like I really want to find ways to collaborate with teachers throughout the state. And so no sense in like reinventing the wheel. A lot of teachers in neighboring districts are probably having conversations with their students or figuring out what creative ways they can explore. And so I think read that book and then go start having some conversations with other teachers is my 2 cents.
I try to keep up and I fail. I mean, I'm really into this stuff, so like I enjoy my off hours watching YouTube videos with AI news, and there's hundreds of creators that are good to great. But there is one a source. It's the Hard Fork podcast from the New York Times that is both available on YouTube and via podcast apps, and I find it to be a nice tight hour every week. And AI is not their focus, but kind of evolving technological environments is. And so they talk about AI a lot. And what I like about that is that they cover, if you want to drink from a fire hose of AI news, it's available to you, right? Not in the standard locations. You're not going to find a lot of good analysis on the nightly news or in the typical morning paper, but they process all the technical news in a that's, I think, approachable from both techies and non-techies. And that's one of the ways that I kind of keep an eye on this particular news. But Connor couldn't be more correct that the conversation and connection is really our way out here. And the only way we're going to come up with answers to these questions is to kind of work through them together. And I also strongly believe that it's not, we discussed the concept of experts earlier, but there are a lot of research folks, people in higher ed, folks in state offices that I think are doing really good work here. But we can't wait around for all our traditional means of experimentation to come to fruition. And so we're gonna have to do a lot of this on our own on the front lines, because it's gonna take a while before we have great answers, and I don't think AI is gonna wait around for us to figure it out.
That flows really nicely into the next thing I want to ask you guys, which is about the future of AI. So how do you see AI impacting teachers and students in the coming year? And what role do you think it will play? If you can tell the future, I don't know. It's a big question.
Yeah, grab your magic 8 ball and
Yeah, as I peer into the crystal ball, I think that there's these tools are increasing in their capabilities, and that can open the doors for students to explore and be like be like a jetpack for their learning at certain times, or an opportunity for them to explore on their own. I think that will certainly happen for some students. And I also think that one possible positive route that we can go in education as a result of all this generative AI tool development is that I think we should practice more social skills. I think we should practice less technology in the classroom. Like, as a computer science teacher, kids are on the computers coding in my class, but I really try to do as much off the technology as possible, because we're seeing that these tools are really, really good at doing all of these things. So maybe students don't, and I'm not a writing teacher, but maybe accompanied with the writing is a debate and discussion about what we've just written about. And that sounds great in theory. I know that in practice, incorporating that takes a lot of work from teachers, but I think a transition towards having students engage more in some of those face-to-face, in-person conversations, discussions, debates, all of that, I think will provide students really great learning experiences. And who knows in 2 years what these AI tools are going to be capable of. And if we're trying to play this catch-up race of well, let's just assess things that the AI can't do, it's going to be a constantly losing battle. And so let's currently focus on the things that are super unique to humans. AI, I don't want to have a discussion with AI. I want to have a discussion with my students about whatever the topic is that we're covering. And I think students like that. Students like learning that is a little bit really involved and gets them away from the screens a little bit.
I think the next year is going to provide us more clarity on the policy issues around AI. And I'm talking about things like data privacy. I'm talking about things like copyright and intellectual property. As courts start to weigh in on this, I think that it will help give us some confidence that we can start digging in on some of these tools and not face a situation later where the tool is unavailable anymore, or the content is suspect, or any of those pieces. But that's going to help this conversation a lot. I know a lot of folks that and I'm not using this word to be colorful. I'm using this word because that's how they feel. They're disgusted by these tools, right? It stole human knowledge. It's rendering jobs worthless. Those are important discussions. But I think it's also important to not pay attention to the horse race as much as to think about it in context of, your universe, right? The 20 feet around you is the most important. And so, I mean, I'm entertained by the Microsoft versus OpenAI versus Claude versus Google versus Amazon versus DeepSeek versus, that's all an interesting debate to me. But the bottom line is that other than providing me some drama to keep it to pay attention to in this space, it's not helping me figure out how I might want to utilize these tools in context of education. So I don't want to go another year and not have comprehensive solutions for this, but as I think both Connor and I mentioned several times today, it's moving so quickly that we're going to have to, especially in the classrooms where teachers aren't thinking about this yet, start to experiment and take data and then rework our tool and then collect data and then share, the kind of micro action research models that we've been preaching to teachers for, 25 years now to help their own professional learning and leadership, I think are going to become of utmost importance in classrooms. And I would call on policymakers and leaders to work on how can we give resources to schools to help create the right environment to create great solutions with AI and not just do AI for AI's sake.
You guys have given us so much information. I've been taking notes like crazy especially for resources that I'm unfamiliar with. Definitely like drinking from a fire hose, but I'd like to, if you could, I'll ask Connor first. If there's one piece of advice you want to give to our listeners, and you've given tons, but so let's try to narrow it down. Was there one piece of advice that you'd like to share with them?
Don't believe the hype. Like there's the best thing that we have as teachers is the relationships that we build with our students, and that's not changing. And so there are endless possibilities of how this tool, how these various generative AI tools could be implemented. But I think at the end of the day, we're teaching humans, and humans want to be taught by humans. And the number one thing that I could have in my classroom to improve student outcomes is going to be a positive relationship with those students. And so I think that is really a huge focus and priority, and that we shouldn't get too straight away from that foundation of our teaching experience.
Excellent. Jason, what would you leave everyone with?
Quoting Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental, right? He attributed to Walt Whitman, but there's apparently some question of the provenance of that quotation. But I think, you need to be curious about this stuff. And it feels weird because it is weird, right? The fact that AI might tell you it won't do something because it doesn't follow its training data or its rules, and you can literally sweet talk AI out of its own rules. In fact, I've done it a couple of times now. That's something you need to understand. And so bring a healthy sense of curiosity and adventure to this. I would echo Connor's point that, teaching kids about AI does not mean handing them AI and then shrugging your shoulders. In fact, if anything, I think that's kind of why the cell phone thing has become such a mess, is because, that's kind of how we handled it, not just in schools, but also in society. So let's be more thoughtful about this and understand that it's probably going to change an awful lot about how our world works. So let's seize the day and take on this extraordinary challenge and understand that if we do it right, I think it could really make a big difference for teaching and learning outcomes for our kids.
Totally agree with that, Jason. I think that's a good addition. That like it will result in some big changes to our society and to our educational process, and some of those are going to change but others aren't. And one of those things that isn't going to change is those relationships. That's why I start there, because a lot of stuff might change, but not the fact that I have a whole classroom of different learners and they're all unique, and I really enjoy building relationships
Yeah.
and teaching them and learning with them.
I think it's worth mentioning. I left the classroom 15 years ago, but there's a reason why I still have a close connection with about 50 of my former students, right? And it's not because I was really good with tech, and I was really good with tech, at least what tech was back then. It's because, the relationship part of that. And, in fact, if anything, it's what we spend most of our time at MTDA. I think one of the reasons why we have been fairly effective in this space. And if anything, in fact, our student perception ratings have improved since the pandemic, even though there's all this kind of national hand-wringing about distance learning. It's because, we keep preaching that to both our teachers and our students, right? Like, if you could learn from a YouTube video, we could just hand, babies a tablet and say good luck and check in on them in 18 years. We can't do that. Learning is human. Doesn't mean there isn't an extraordinary amount of ways we could use this stuff, but learning is human, and we should continue to focus on that every single time we can.
I can't thank you guys enough for coming. So every time, I've visited with you both, I've gone to presentations that you've both been in. It's like, I just suck it up.
Thank you so much, Connor and Jason, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and experience with AI in the classroom. It can be overwhelming to know where to start and how to integrate these increasingly prevalent and shifting technologies into our current instruction in ways that are ethical and center on responsible technology use. The advice and resources you've shared are helpful starting points for educators to take on this relevant topic. And we thank you for spending your time learning with us, and we hope you'll join us for our next episode. If you're new here, each month we close with a quote that reflects the themes and ideas discussed in the episode. This time, we've chosen a quote by journalist Sydney Harris. "The real danger is not that computers will begin to think like men, but that men will begin to think like computers." As you reflect on today's episode, consider these questions. How can we as educators utilize and teach innovative technologies in our classroom while communicating the value of and elevating students' creativity and ideas? From this episode, what ideas or resources would you like to bring into your own instruction, and how will you use them to help aid in students' expression? If you'd like to dive deeper into these topics, check out our listener guides, which include pathways for earning PDUs through independent or collaborative learning. You can find that link in the bio. Finally, if you have ideas for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Please fill out the Qualtrics form linked in the bio and in the listener guides. Your input helps us continue to provide meaningful and timely content for Montana's educators. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep inspiring.